Hiraga Saito was a young man with no friends who lived in modern-day Japan, and one day, while he was sleeping, he was suddenly transported to a world full of magic. There, he found mages, magical creatures, and everything that's great about these isekais. He landed on the ground inside a magical academy, surrounded by mages, and he was kind of shocked not to remember having been hit by that famous isekai truck before he arrived there. Everyone then started laughing at the way he was dressed, and the mage who summoned him tried to abandon him, just like her father had done, and take note of her name, Louise Françoise Leblanc de la Vallière. But since I'm not crazy enough to keep saying that full name all the time, let's just call her Louise. She even tried to summon a different familiar, but then her professor didn't allow it, and forced her to make a contract with Saito. She approached him, but he backed away, suspicious of women. Even so, Louise ordered him to stay quiet and forged a contract between them. A mark then appeared on Saito's hand, indicating that the bond had been created. Saito discovered that Louise was a mage from a noble family, but she was completely useless at magic, and all her spells failed and backfired, which is why everyone called her Zero. She took him to her room still angry and started treating him like a servant, throwing her clothes for him to wash. Saito tried to stand up for himself and told her to leave, but Louise grabbed her wand and cast a spell on him, which failed and caused another explosion. When things calmed down, Saito decided to run away through the hallways, where he bumped into a blonde guy named Guichet. Without stopping, he kept running until he reached outside the building. Louise ran after him, but Guichet used his magic to lift Saito off the ground and into the air. At that moment, Saito saw two moons and realized he wasn't dreaming. He really had been transported to a fantasy world. That night, Saito had to sleep on the floor, and Louise chained him so that he couldn't escape. She threw her clothes at him and asked him to wash them, which he agreed to a bit reluctantly, but realized that this was the norm in that world. She mentioned she had more unwashed clothes in her drawer, which deeply irritated him, but he let it go. Louise asked him to help her get dressed, but Saito refused, saying he wasn't her servant and would only do it if she freed him from the chains. She agreed, and he helped her get dressed, and after being freed from the chains, they went to the dining hall for breakfast. Saito hadn't eaten anything since arriving in that world and was starving, but noticed people whispering and watching them. Louise instructed Saito to pull out her chair and told him to sit on the floor near her feet. He ate a piece of stale bread on a cracked plate. After breakfast, they went outside, and Saito saw how the other students interacted with their familiars. He then met Kirsha, who had a fire-breathing salamander as her familiar, and she mocked Louise, suggesting she had summoned a peasant to pretend she had a familiar. Louise was upset and walked away, and Saito accidentally bumped into a maid named Siesta, who dropped a cake, and they both apologized. He picked up the cake and put it back on the plate, and Siesta, a fellow commoner, said she was just a servant, unlike familiars. Guichet, whom Saito had seen before, called for Siesta, and Saito asked if he could bring the cake to him, and she agreed. He took the cake to Guichet, who was with a girl, and heard Guichet say he had no one in his life but her. Saito couldn't help but laugh, and Guichet asked what was so funny. Saito revealed he had seen him flirting with the first-year girl the day before. Guichet even tried to deny it, but Saito pointed to the girl from yesterday, exposing Guichet's lie. The two girls discovered each other and slapped him, knocking him down. Guichet challenged Saito to a duel, and he accepted. Louise insisted that he apologize, but Saito ignored her and went to the duel location. Guichet was surprised Saito showed up, but Louise tried to intervene, mentioning that duels were forbidden on campus. Guichet argued that duels between nobles were forbidden, but since Saito was a commoner, that made them acceptable. The duel began, but Guichet used magic to fight for him instead of facing Saito directly. Saito took a hit and fell, and Louise urged him to surrender, but he refused. Despite his injuries, Saito kept getting back up, and Guichet gave him a sword, thinking he wouldn't even be able to hold it. But surprisingly, Saito felt his pain turn into strength, and with a single strike, he cut Guichet's golem clean in half. Furious, Guichet summoned more golems, but Saito defeated all of them before pointing his sword at Guichet's throat, forcing him to surrender. Everyone was shocked to see a commoner defeat a noble, and Louise ran up to him, but Saito, exhausted, fainted. He woke up 3 days later, lying in bed covered in bandages. Siesta was also in the room when he woke up, and she said he had been unconscious the entire time. Louise was there too, sleeping by the window, clearly exhausted from taking care of him so much. When Saito recovered, his life went back to normal. Now he had to wash all of Louise's clothes and help her get dressed every day like before. One day, Saito went to class with Louise, and he noticed that the other students were mocking her, calling her Louise the Zero. Saito found that hilarious. And when they left the classroom, he asked why they called her that. Louise explained, but Saito couldn't hold back his laughter, which made her furious. As if that weren't enough, Saito started making up a song to mock her even more. Louise got angry and decided not to give him any food that day, leaving the poor boy starving. And during the night, Saito begged for food non-stop. Louise finally gave in and said she'd give him dinner. Saito made another joke about her name, and that was the last straw. Louise, furious, kicked him out of the room and told him to sleep outside. He sat there trying to get comfortable in the hallway. And that's where Siesta saw him and asked what he was doing there. He explained that Louise had kicked him out, and that he was starving. Feeling sorry for him, she took him to the kitchen, where the workers gave him plenty of food, impressed that he was the only commoner to defeat a noble. After filling his stomach, Saito went back outside Louise's room, but ended up getting caught by Kirsha, who took him to her room. There, Kirsha tried to seduce him, saying he should switch Louise for her, and before anything could happen, Louise stormed into the room and dragged Saito back to her own. On the way back, she explained that her family and Kirsha's family were rivals, and that even though she didn't care about him, she wouldn't let Kirsha take him. But as always, Saito didn't understand a thing, and asked if Louise was jealous, and the result was another well-deserved beating. After letting out her anger, Louise said that the next day they would go to town, and Saito tried to escape again. But this time, she let him sleep inside the room. The next day, Louise took Saito to town on horseback, and as they rode, she mentioned that Kirsha seemed interested in him, and that he needed a weapon to defend himself. They arrived at a blacksmith shop, where Louise asked for the best sword, but was horrified by the price, and with no better option, ended up buying an old, rusty sword. That night, Kirsha showed up in Saito's room holding a golden sword, far more luxurious than the one he had. She offered the sword to Saito and asked whose side he wanted to be on, and Saito was tempted, but before he could answer, a voice suddenly came from nowhere, calling both girls idiots. Confused, Saito denied that it was him speaking, and soon they all realized the voice was coming from the rusty sword itself. Curious, Saito spoke to the sword, and they introduced themselves. Feeling lonely in that world, Saito was happy to finally have a companion, and decided to keep the old sword instead of the fancy one. The next night, Saito tried to wash one of Louise's silk dresses, but he failed miserably. He seemed to be terrible at absolutely everything, and that's when Siesta showed up and helped him clean the fabric properly. After a while, she said goodbye with a sad look and walked away. The next day, Louise told Saito to wait outside with the other familiars while she attended class. While waiting, one of the kitchen staff called him in to eat something. Saito took the opportunity to ask about Siesta, since he hadn't seen her around. Curious, he asked the cook where she was, and he replied that she had left the academy that morning. She had been taken by Count Mott, and Saito got confused and worried. So he went back to Louise's room and told her what he had found out. Louise explained that when nobles take maids with them, it's usually to make them their lovers, and often against their will. Saito was completely shocked and outraged, and he asked Louise if she wasn't furious about the situation. But for Louise, that was something completely normal, and she simply replied that she felt sorry for Siesta, but there was nothing she could do for her. And later that night, Saito ran away from the academy and went straight to the Count's mansion. As soon as he entered, he was immediately caught by the guards and taken to Count Mott. Saito, using all his supreme intelligence, replied in the dumbest way possible, saying he was there because he heard Count Mott was evil. And the Count, already out of patience, looked at him and said that if he wanted to stay alive, he'd better get the hell out. But Saito is stubborn and refused to leave, and asked what he could do for him to release Siesta. The Count then said that if he brought a certain book that Kirsha possessed, which was a family heirloom, he would let Siesta go. Saito ran off into the forest, where he was found by Louise, who had already been searching. Without patience, she dragged him back to the academy and told him to stop being an idiot and just sleep, since they couldn't do anything about this matter. And Saito agreed and pretended he was going to sleep. But as soon as he had a chance, he quietly snuck into Kirsha's room and asked her for the book. Surprisingly, Kirsha didn't care about the relic and gave him the book without questioning, as long as Saito agreed to go out with her. That made him nauseous, and he stormed out of the room, leaving Kirsha surprised and curious to know what had made him so upset. Wasting no time, Saito grabbed a sword, stole a horse, and headed straight to the Count's mansion. Meanwhile, Kirsha went to Louise's room, along with Tabitha. She woke Louise up and told her about Saito's suspicious behavior. Louise was already used to his idiocy, and was shocked to see he had actually vanished, asking where he might be. Tabitha, blunt as always, said he had probably gone to the Count's mansion again, and with no other option, they all jumped onto Tabitha's dragon and flew straight to the Count's mansion. Meanwhile, Saito once again tried sneaking into the mansion, but as expected, he was caught by the guards again and taken to the Count. Without thinking twice, Saito drew his sword on the Count, which made him furious, since no commoner would dare point a blade at a noble. The Count then smashed a vase and used the water inside it to attack Saito, who collapsed to the ground without reacting. Before he could get up, the Count turned the water into sharp little blades and fired them at him. Luckily, Louise arrived just in time and managed to deflect the projectiles, saving Saito. Seeing that daughters of noble families were involved, the Count calmed down and decided to talk. He said that for what Saito had done, he should be sentenced to death, but Louise asked him to punish her in Saito's place. Kirsha then asked the Count if there was anything she could do for him to forgive Saito, and he replied that if he could keep her family's book, he would reconsider. Without hesitation, Kirsha took the book and handed it to the Count, who began leafing through it with excitement. Saito, curious, looked at the book and realized it was nothing but a pin-up magazine from modern Japan, probably brought by a summoner in the past, just like how he had been summoned to that world. Siesta, finally free, thanked Saito and kissed him on the cheek before they all returned to the academy. A few days later, Louise got excited about the school exhibition, where students would show off to their families to compete for prizes. Saito found this sudden excitement strange, since she never cared about that kind of thing before. Determined to impress, Louise started teaching Saito proper manners, but as expected, nothing worked. She tried to fix his posture, but he remained sloppy. Out of ideas, Louise asked what talents he had, and Saito jokingly suggested demonstrating his laundry skills, which of course earned him a good scolding. That's when Louise remembered his skills with a sword and asked if he could show them. However, Saito was still a bit embarrassed because of what happened before and refused, but Louise told him to practice, so he wouldn't embarrass himself in front of everyone. He then started training in the courtyard, but quickly became a laughingstock for the other students, since he could barely keep his balance. Siesta arrived and announced that Princess Henrietta would be visiting the academy, which made everyone more serious and dedicated in their duties. When Princess Henrietta arrived, her poise and elegance caught everyone's attention, but at the same time she seemed very friendly. That night, Louise asked Saito how his training was going, but he admitted he was still having trouble with balance. As a joke, Saito said maybe he really should demonstrate his laundry skills, which irritated Louise quite a bit. Before she could answer, a hooded figure entered her room and hugged her. To Saito's surprise, it was Princess Henrietta. The princess and Louise started talking and reminiscing about their childhood friendship. They were very close, and the princess said how much she appreciated Louise's company after her father's death. Even though Louise apologized for Saito's behavior, Princess Henrietta just laughed and wished them good luck for the exhibition. On the day of the event, Louise was very nervous, and during her presentation, she introduced Saito as her familiar of peasant origin, which made everyone laugh. And although embarrassed, Princess Henrietta didn't join in the laughter. Saito's demonstration didn't go very well, making him the target of several jokes, and Louise felt very embarrassed and quickly left the stage. Outside, they were surprised by a giant golem that attacked them. Saito protected Louise but ended up being captured. Louise tried to cast a fireball spell, but accidentally hit a tower, which startled the golem, and it fled after grabbing something. Saito was saved by Tabitha, also known as Charlotte, who arrived flying on her dragon. Later, a committee was formed to investigate the theft, but no clues had been found so far. The next day, Louise and Saito were in class, and Kirsha continued her relentless pursuit of Saito. She brought tasty food to the classroom, knowing Saito didn't get those treats when he was with Louise. She even fed him herself, to Louise's great irritation, and suddenly the teacher entered the classroom and asked Louise, Kirsha, and Tabitha to follow him. They were taken to the headmaster's office, where he discussed the peculiar theft of a secret weapon from the castle. The headmaster suspected a crime and asked everyone to stay alert, believing the thief was someone familiar with the academy. He had a sketch of the thief, and although her face was hidden under a hood, it was known that she had fled into the forest after stealing the weapon. He asked for volunteers to capture the thief, but surprisingly no one wanted to volunteer for the job due to the danger of the golem accompanying her. Director Eve was disappointed with the noble's reluctance to act, however. Louise raised her hand to volunteer, followed by Tabitha and Kirsha. This surprised everyone, who expressed concern about 3 third-year students facing the thief alone. The headmaster praised their courage and highlighted their exceptional skills. Tabitha's anointed knight statue, Kirsch's powerful magic, and Louise's lineage of powerful mages along with the sword skills of Scythe. Together they formed a formidable team, and the headmaster's secretary also volunteered to guide them through the forest. The headmaster approved, and the group ventured into the forest, discovering tracks left by the thief. Along the way, Kersha offered the sword she had bought to Saito, and with Louise's silent approval, he accepted. They followed the trail to an isolated cabin deep in the forest, and Tabitha used her magic to search for hidden traps but found none. They then went inside and found an abandoned cabin, with broken dishes and scattered furniture. Just as they were about to leave, Tabitha discovered the stolen item, the Staff of Destruction. However, their exploration was interrupted by Louise's screams outside. The golem had returned and attacked them. Tabitha tried using her wind magic against it, but it was ineffective. Kersha cast her fire magic, which had some effect, but not enough to defeat the golem. Tabitha summoned her dragon to help, but Louise felt inferior due to her imperfect magic. So she began attacking the golem repeatedly, drawing its attention. When the golem tried to deliver the final blow, Saito saved Louise just in time, but he gave her a slap so she'd recognize her own worth. Louise confessed that the criticisms about her weak magical abilities hurt her deeply. Meanwhile, the golem kept attacking, and Saito fought bravely with the sword that Kersha had given him, but it broke. In desperation, he drew the rusty sword he carried on his back, which he had promised wouldn't break. Saito felt a surge of energy and began attacking the golem with a newfound strength. Although he managed to cause some damage, the golem's regeneration abilities kept it active. Determined, Louise joined in and used the Staff of Destruction, but couldn't activate it. The golem approached her, but Saito saved her once again, taking the staff from her hands, and upon examining the object, Saito quickly recognized what it was. Actually a rocket launcher from modern Japan. Without wasting time, Saito assembled the weapon and used it to destroy the golem. And relieved Tabitha, Kersha and Saito reunited with Louise, while the headmaster's secretary retrieved the stolen item. However, Saito noticed that the secretary had behaved in an oddly calm manner the entire time. Suddenly, she took off her glasses and untied her hair, revealing herself as the thief, named Fuke. She taunted them, but before she could use her weapon, she was quickly knocked out by Saito. On the way back, Saito explained that the weapon was a rocket launcher from his world, and that he knew it could only be fired once. In the headmaster's office, they were congratulated and informed that they should go to the capital to receive the reward for capturing the thief. Later, already in the capital, Saito was watching people dancing and enjoying themselves when he suddenly saw Louise entering the ballroom, wearing a beautiful dress. She walked up to him and invited him to dance, which he gladly accepted. And the next day, Louise and Saito were summoned to the royal palace, where Henrietta thanked them for saving the day. She then approached Saito and extended her hand for him to kiss, but Saito, not understanding the gesture, was confused. Louise told him to kiss the princess's hand, but suddenly Saito took the bold step and kissed Henrietta's face, leaving her completely stunned. Right after, Saito was brutally beaten by Louise, who was furious, and apologized to the princess before punching him away. However, Henrietta assured them that everything was fine and revealed that she needed a favor from them. Without thinking twice, Louise said she would do anything for the princess. That's when Henrietta explained that she wanted them to stay in the city a little longer and pretend to be commoners so they could spy on the aristocracy, as there were rumors that nobles were treating common people very poorly. Without hesitation, Louise immediately agreed and assured that they would do everything Henrietta asked, without question. Later that day, Louise came out of a shop wearing simple peasant clothes, something that displeased her greatly. But it was necessary for them to blend in, so she headed to the stable, where she tried to buy a horse, but realized they were too expensive, and they couldn't afford one yet. Next, Louise found a luxurious 5-star hotel and tried to make a reservation, but the hotel only accepted nobles, and they didn't have enough money for a room. Starting to get frustrated, she lost her patience when Saito suggested they look for a cheaper place to sleep, and she simply walked away, irritated. Later that night, Saito found Louise sitting alone on a bench, and with a defeated look, she confessed she had lost all their money in a casino, trying to win more, and Saito was shocked and suggested they return to the castle and ask the princess for more money. Louise refused and said they couldn't fail the princess, and as they talked, a strangely extravagant man approached them and offered a room in his inn, but with one condition. Louise would have to work as a waitress alongside other girls. Furious, Louise protested but ended up accepting. And meanwhile, Saito was assigned to work in the kitchen under Jessica's supervision. During the job introduction, the innkeeper announced a challenge. Whoever received the most tips that night would win a bonus and earn the right to wear a special outfit from his heritage, which he claimed was magical and guaranteed generous tips. He said the last person to wear it got so rich that she quit her job and became an influencer. Dinner service then began, and Louise was assigned to her first table. A customer asked her for wine, and holding back her frustration, she served the drink, but accidentally spilled wine on the table, and the customer began bothering her in an annoying way. Furious, she threw the rest of the wine in his face and threatened him. But before things could escalate, the innkeeper intervened and calmed the customer. Somehow, the work night came to an end, and Louise went to complain to Saito, who was already lying in bed, and he told her to calm down, as at least they now had food and a place to sleep. Louise, frustrated and not used to this kind of life, had trouble sleeping, and at one point, she saw some bats and, terrified, crawled under Saito's blanket to feel safer. Over the next few days, Louise tried to adapt to the job, but kept getting irritated with the customers, and eventually the innkeeper decided to temporarily remove her and told her to watch the other waitresses to learn. During this time, Louise noticed that Saito was having a lot of fun, which made her even more irritated. Without thinking twice, she grabbed a bottle and smashed it on his head, leaving him unconscious. Saito wakes up in the room and finds Jessica, who tells him he was knocked out, and then asks if Louise is an aristocrat. This immediately worries Saito, who tries to hide the fact, but Jessica laughs and says that Louise can't even carry a plate properly, though her attitude and confidence clearly show she's a noble. Saito confesses they're on a secret mission, which excites Jessica, who asks for details. However, Louise enters the room and immediately stands upright as Jessica introduces herself. Without any patience, Louise ignores everything and kicks Saito in the groin, knocking him out again before dragging him away. But Jessica stops her and asks if Louise has earned any tips yet, and Louise gets visibly nervous and tells Jessica to mind her own business. Saito tries to say something and gets another kick to the face. The following night, Louise stands to the side, worried because she still hasn't gotten enough tips to win the bonus, since today is the last day. That's when the big shot Tristan arrives at the inn with his guards, and the place is packed with no available seats. But the guards clear out the entire inn so that the count can be accommodated, and he demands the innkeeper serve him. Jessica explains that this guy is a tax collector, and if they don't treat him right, they'll end up paying a fortune in taxes. No one wants to serve him, but Louise sees a chance to get a tip and walks up to him with a tray. But the count isn't impressed and even mocks her, which leaves her completely irritated. And without thinking twice, she kicks him in the face, shocking everyone in the inn, and the guards immediately surround Louise as the count tries to apologize in a panic. Then, to defend Louise, Saito steps in front and tells the count to get lost, saying he won't let anyone touch her. The count is furious and orders his guards to attack, and Saito prepares to draw his sword, but realizes he forgot it in the room. He panics and starts sweating cold, but Louise quickly pulls out her wand and blasts the guards, leaving everyone in the inn speechless. The count is now terrified and realizes Louise isn't just any commoner. She must be from a noble family. He even suspects she might be from a nameless house. But when Louise shows him the royal decree from Princess Henrietta, he goes into full panic mode, trembling, and begs for forgiveness, offering a bunch of money to settle everything right there. Louise accepts and tells him to scram, and the count's guards run out of the inn. With that, Louise is surrounded by the other girls, who thank her for what she did. Jessica reveals that, with the count's money, Louise became the top tip earner, and as a result, the innkeeper declares her the winner of the competition. That night, Saito lies down thinking about what they'll do the next day, and soon after, at dawn, they head back to Tristan. On the way, they run into Jessica, who immediately gives Saito a very cheerful and bouncy hug, which greatly annoys Louise. Jessica says she's going to visit Tabitha, and suggests they do the same before getting into her carriage. Louise doesn't care, but Saito promises to visit her, and is rewarded with a kick to the face. Meanwhile, inside the carriage, Jessica tries to make conversation with Tabitha, but she doesn't care and keeps reading her book. Jessica complains about how she was expelled from her last school, and how because of that, her parents almost married her off to some old guy who wanted to be her sugar daddy. Suddenly, the carriage stops, and the farmer says the road ahead is flooded and they'll need to take a detour, but Jessica finds the situation suspicious. Meanwhile, back at the Magic Academy, Louise gives all the dirty laundry to Saito, once again ordering him to wash it all before kicking him out of the room. She's still very annoyed because he seemed really happy around Jessica, even though she can't realize she hits Saito more than all their enemies combined, so obviously he won't be too into her. Guichet is already used to all this abuse, so he happily goes off to wash the clothes while Montmorency scolds him for being seen with someone else. She asks Siesta if Saito is back before going in, while Guichet notices her. After that, Saito sees an old rusty pot in front of the kitchen. When he asks the chef, he tells him to keep it if he wants. He takes the pot to a secluded spot, ready to use it, and back in the carriage, Jessica notices flooded houses below them, which is very strange, considering it hadn't rained that much. She also sees a sash that makes her realize Tabitha belongs to one of the royal families, but they finally arrive at the mansion, which is even bigger than Jessica imagined, and the butler is ready to receive her. He takes her to a guest room, where Jessica sits while waiting for Tabitha, who goes to another room to see her mother. Upon entering the room, she finds a frail-looking woman with blue hair, staring out the window, and when Tabitha announces herself, the old lady panics and starts telling her to go back to where she came from. Meanwhile, in the sitting room, Jessica asks the butler about a painting on the wall, and he explains that the painting belongs to Tabitha's father, who was the king's younger brother. He was an excellent mage, even more powerful than the king himself, and was loved by nearly everyone in the kingdom. But one day, an unknown assassin shot him in the chest and killed him. After that, Tabitha and her mother went to the palace for an event. One of the aristocrats tried to poison Tabitha, but her mother noticed something was wrong, and like a madwoman, instead of discarding it, she drank it herself. The glass contained a magical poison that broke her mind, and ever since then she's been like that, thinking the doll in her hand is Tabitha, while her real daughter remains neglected. After that, Tabitha changed as a person and began taking on insanely dangerous tasks and missions that even top mages were afraid of. She even killed a three-headed dragon by herself, and after that, she got tired of everything and decided to join an academy, far from all those memories. Back at the academy, Saito, with his brilliant intelligence, decided to build a hot tub and is enjoying a nighttime bath under the starry sky while watching the two moons. Siesta shows up to check on things and gets startled, dropping food all over the place. She gets into the bath to clean herself, and they talk about the moon. Meanwhile, Guichet arrives at the table and starts chatting with Montmorency, and she proposes a toast and tries to slip the potion in, when Guichet sees Louise walking angrily outside. She walks across the lawn and finds Saito bathing with Siesta, which makes her sad, and she walks away, jealous and angry at her own feelings for her servant. Meanwhile, Guichet is working his charm, but Montmorency shouts that she saw a flying naked woman, distracting him and spilling the love potion. Surprisingly, Louise approaches them, grabs the glass, drinks it all, and storms off angrily. And we already know where this is going, right? Sometime later, Saito returns to his room and finds Louise sulking on the bed and asks what's wrong. At first, she's passive-aggressive, but gradually her face starts to turn red as her true feelings surface, and she hugs Saito, saying she felt hurt when she saw him bathing with Siesta. She even confesses that she loves him. Saito gets all confused, looks around and sees Montmorency spying through the door, and says it's her fault. Back at the mansion, Tabitha is asleep in bed while Jessica thinks about the mission the butler gave Tabitha and how she needs to complete it as soon as possible. Tabitha tells Jessica to stay at the house until she returns, as it's dangerous, but Jessica insists on going with her. Her thoughts are interrupted when Tabitha starts having a nightmare, and she hugs her to help her sleep. The next day, Saito goes out to do laundry, as usual, but Louise has been clinging to him ever since. He remembers the conversation he had the night before, and that Montmorency told him the potion was meant for Guiche, because he's a cheater who can't be loyal. But Louise drank the entire potion, and since she already had feelings for him, she became even more attached. He asks when the effect will wear off, and she has no idea. And Louise keeps clinging to Saito, saying she can't leave him alone because he'll end up with another girl. At that moment, Siesta arrives, and Louise immediately starts acting like a crazy ex, accusing Saito of cheating on her with Siesta. This makes Siesta very uncomfortable, and she starts backing away, while Louise gets furious, convinced that Saito likes Siesta, and ends up running off. Saito goes after Siesta and finds her doing laundry near the fountain, and he tries to talk, saying everything was a misunderstanding, but Siesta doesn't respond. She only says that it doesn't matter to her, and Saito insists, explaining that this is all happening because of a love potion Louise drank by accident, and ever since then, she's been acting strange. But Siesta doesn't buy it, and tells him he doesn't need to lie. She makes it clear that even she knows love potions are illegal. and that no one at the academy would dare use one, and after that she gives him the cold shoulder and leaves. Saito returns to his room exhausted and finds Louise on the bed, still upset about everything that happened. As soon as he approaches her, she starts crying, saying she doesn't feel beautiful at all, and Saito ends up falling off the bed, but quickly gets up and hugs her, promising he'll find a way to fix this, no matter what. That night, Saito goes downstairs and enters Montmorency's room, ignoring Geisha, and without hesitation, tells her to make Louise go back to normal. Montmorency replies that the effect will wear off in time, but Saito stares at her seriously and demands she find an antidote or a spell to fix it right away. Geisha tries to intervene, reminding Saito that he's talking to an aristocrat, but Saito immediately fires back, reminding him of the beating he took before. Geisha backs off right away and tells Montmorency it's better to do what Saito's asking, but she stands firm, saying it's not possible. Saito then plays his trump card. He says he knows love potions are illegal, and if necessary, he'll go to the headmaster and tell him everything. At that moment, Montmorency gets nervous and ends up giving in, saying she'll make the antidote. But one of the ingredients is in a dangerous and hard-to-reach location. Saito doesn't hesitate, and says they'll leave tomorrow, and with some pressure, Montmorency reluctantly agrees. That night, Louise bites Saito out of nowhere before falling asleep, while he's taking care of her, and the next morning, everyone mounts their horses and heads toward a lake, with Louise still sleeping in Saito's arms. When they reach the lake, Geisha runs ahead, while Louise tries to give Saito a sweater she knitted, but it's so small it barely looks like a hat. Even so, Saito accepts it and puts it on. Suddenly they hear Geisha scream. He slipped in the lake water, and Montmorency observes the area with a serious look, commenting that there used to be a village there, but now everything is completely flooded. She says this can only mean that the water spirit is angry, and warns that they'll have to wait until nightfall, because that's when the spirit appears. When night comes, Montmorency takes a frog from her mouth, cuts her finger and drips her blood on it, telling it to find the water spirit. The frog vanishes, and she tells them that when she was younger she made a pact with the spirit, and it probably still remembers her. Suddenly, a massive column of water rises into the sky, and Montmorency steps forward, announcing her name and lineage, calling out to the spirit. The water begins to take shape until it becomes the image of a woman, and the spirit looks at Montmorency and says it remembers her, but wants to know what she desires. Montmorency asks for a special ingredient, but the spirit refuses. Saito decides to speak up, even as Montmorency tries to stop him. He kneels down and sincerely pleads for the spirit to help them, and the spirit stares at him and, after a moment, responds that it will help, but only if they defeat the humans, who are causing trouble in the area. Without a second thought, Saito accepts, while Montmorency hesitates, saying she doesn't want to get involved in a fight, but Saito gives her no choice, and says he'll blackmail her if she doesn't agree. When night falls, they hide in the forest and wait for the attackers, while Louise keeps annoying Saito with her clingy behavior. Suddenly, they notice two mages camouflaged near the lake. They're chanting spells, and the energy they give off is very strong. Saito prepares to attack, but before he can act, Geisha pulls him aside, warning him not to charge in recklessly. Those mages look very skilled, and could easily take Saito down if he's not careful. Geisha comes up with a plan to distract the mages while Saito launches a surprise attack to defeat them. Saito agrees, and Geisha leaves his hiding spot, using his earth magic to create a chunk of ground and hurl it at the enemies. But the mages are fast and use wind and fire magic in succession, blocking the attacks with ease. Saito decides to attack, but the fire mages hurl a fireball at him, forcing him to run. He dodges and at the last second counterattacks, slashing the fireball in half. But he ends up getting hit by an ice spell, and he falls to the ground as the enemies approach to finish him off. But Louise intervenes and uses her magic to cause an explosion, revealing the enemies' faces. To everyone's surprise, the mages were Tabitha and Jessica, who were also shocked to recognize them. Saito and the others explain what's going on, and Jessica tells them they were given a mission to defeat the water spirit because it's flooding the area and causing all sorts of damage. Saito suggests calling the spirit and asking directly the reason behind all this, and Kirsha immediately makes a show and summons the creature. Saito asks why she is flooding the village and causing so much trouble, and the spirit replies that humans stole the treasure she was guarding, and if they don't return it, she'll keep flooding everything until the whole planet is submerged. Saito asks what this treasure is, and the spirit says it's a magic ring stolen by a man named Cromwell. Saito promises to find the ring and return it, and the somewhat dumb spirit believes him and hands over a special ingredient for the potion. On top of that, she promises to lower the flood levels back to normal. And back at the academy, Louise finally returns to normal. And when she realizes everything she said and did, she gets furious and tries to hit Saito for letting that happen. Saito runs for his life, but suddenly the window opens, and Henrietta flies in like a crazy green woman. Louise runs to her and asks why the princess is visiting him alone in the middle of the night, saying it could be dangerous. But Henrietta replies she has an urgent matter to discuss in secret. She reveals that she will soon marry an ugly king from a neighboring kingdom to avoid a war, and the problem is that before that, she exchanged compromising letters with a prince from another kingdom. And if those letters are leaked, the marriage could be cancelled, which would be a disaster. Louise immediately kneels down and promises to do everything in her power to help the princess. Saito, alert, hears a noise behind the door and shouts for whoever is there to show themselves, and to everyone's surprise, it's Geisha, who casually walks in. He greets the princess and says he heard everything and would love to help with the mission. Saito and Louise are completely annoyed by this meddler, but Henrietta knows his father and allows him to join. Later that night, Saito goes out to do laundry and Siesta approaches. She apologizes for not believing him about the love potion, and Saito tells her not to worry, and takes the chance to ask about the region's scientists. Siesta takes him to an old scientist who studies dragons and searches for remains of the last dragon. He says that a familiar like Saito was summoned a long time ago by a legendary mage, and that familiar used void magic. It was a magic so powerful that it vanished from the world. And he also says that Saito has the same mark on his hand, but no one knows more details. Saito returns to the room and finds Louise, who doesn't look very confident. She thinks she's not talented enough for such an important mission. Saito tries to cheer her up, saying she's strong enough, but Louise curls up in bed and lies down, still doubting herself. The next morning, everyone is ready on their horses, and Louise looks at the ring Henrietta gave her, while waiting for the bodyguard who will accompany them. Suddenly, a giant mole bursts out of the ground. It's Geisha's familiar. He hugs it all excited, but the mole jumps on Louise and tries to steal the ring. Geisha explains that his familiar is obsessed with jewels, and out of nowhere, a gust of wind sends the mole flying, knocking it out. Geisha is shocked, and right after, an imposing figure descends from the sky riding a griffin. The man introduces himself as Wards, a renowned knight. He walks straight up to Louise and apologizes for being late, and to Saito's surprise, he learns that this man is Louise's fiancé. Wards picks Louise up in his arms and says the journey starts now. They set off, and Geisha comments to Saito how amazing Griffin Knights are, while Saito gets more and more irritated seeing everyone fawning over Wards. After crossing the arid valley, they finally arrive at the city, and as soon as they enter, all eyes turn to them. Geisha explains that this city was built by an amazing earth mage, just like him. They arrive at the hotel, and Wards announces they'll rest there and leave in the morning. Saito doesn't say anything, and Louise tells him not to be so rude. After that, Wards leaves, and she explains that her parents arranged the marriage, but Saito is still jealous and says nothing. Louise teasingly comments that Wards is a much better warrior than he is, and also way taller than Saito. Then, without giving him any chance to reply, she leaves, leaving him completely furious. At the dinner banquet, Wards praises Louise for summoning a human familiar, something unheard of, and then asks Geisha if he lost his duel against Saito, which makes Geisha choke. Wards then turns to Saito and asks if that was the first time he ever held a sword, and Saito, not interested, replies yes, while Louise praises Wards for knowing so much. Wards then looks at Saito and invites him to a duel. Everyone is surprised, but Saito, still irritated, accepts it disinterestedly, while Louise tries to make him apologize, without success. Wards gets up and says everyone should go to sleep, like true nobles, and he takes Louise to her room while everyone watches. Saito goes with Geisha, who admires the night sky before heading to the club, leaving Saito alone. Bored, he picks up his sword and starts talking to it, asking if it knows anything about the human familiar who came before him, and the sword replies that it belonged to a human thousands of years ago and can only be used by a human familiar like him. He goes outside while the sword explains that he has a latent power to perfectly use any weapon if he wants to, and reveals that the golden sword broke because it was a fake weapon. Saito asks if he can defeat Wards, but the sword replies that it only depends on him. Meanwhile, Wards is drinking with Louise, even though she's underage, and talks about how she used to cry on a boat in the middle of the lake, then says she has latent powers inside her. And Wards says they should marry immediately after the mission, because he can't wait for her to be legal. He tries to kiss her, but at that moment, Louise remembers Saito, and Wards stops, saying her heart has already been taken, so there's no point. After that, he leaves the room and says he hopes she marries him by the end of the mission. The next day, Saito and Wards meet in an alley, ready to duel, and even though Louise tells them not to fight, neither backs down, and Saito grabs his training sword while Wards does the same. He charges forward, striking from every direction, and Saito tries to block, but Wards dodges and steps back first, then counterattacks and pushes Saito away with his sword. Wards complements his speed, but Saito ignores it and uses the wall to jump and attack, but Wards blocks and counterattacks again, delivering several strikes and using magic to blow Saito against some wooden barrels. Louise runs over, worried, and Wards approaches and says Saito will never be able to defeat a mage, which means he'll never be able to protect Louise, and then he walks away. That night, Saito is on the balcony, thoughtful, with tears falling as he remembers what Wards said. Louise comes close and asks if he's crying, but Saito says alphas don't cry, that it's just the rain in his eyes, and Louise insists he should move on, since he lost to the best knight in the kingdom. Saito pushes her away and tells her to leave, and hurt, Louise says she'll marry Wards after the mission, and walks away sadly. After a while, Gishe approaches Saito and says they need to leave, and suddenly the ground starts shaking, and to their surprise, it's a giant golem emerging from the earth. At the top is Fouquet, the thief who was supposed to be in prison. Meanwhile, Louise asks Wards where Saito and Gishe are, but he says they went home because they were too scared. And before she can respond, Wards rides his griffin up the stairs and they reach the tree. At the tree there's a magic ship anchored and ready to leave, and on deck Gishe hides behind Saito, and while Fouquet uses her golem to attack, Saito precisely cuts off its hands, impressing her, but she simply regenerates her arms with magic, and Gishe quickly uses his earth magic to summon some fighting dolls that surround the golem to attack, but the golem destroys them all easily and throws the last doll at Gishe, knocking him down. The golem approaches when suddenly an explosion from Louise hits it, making it fall to its knees, and they look up to see Tabitha and Kirsha descending with the dragon. The commotion draws local villagers to the balcony, forcing Fouquet to flee. When Mount Moran appears, Saito asks where Louise is, and she says they both left for the ship a while ago, and Saito immediately runs off and asks Gishe where the ship is anchored, and he points to the sky where the ship is already flying, and all Saito can do is scream in frustration. On the ship, Louise looks down in conflict, while Wards tells her he'll never leave her alone like Kaido did, and she remembers the moment Kaido pushed her, and feels sad, then looks at Wards and accepts his marriage proposal. Back on the ground, Saito sits and tells Gishe he believes Fouquet was working with Wards, distracting them so they would miss the ship. Gishe is shocked by this claim, while Kirsha says the next ship will leave the following morning, and there's nothing they can do but wait. Suddenly the ground starts shaking again, scaring Gishe, but it turns out to be just his mole. On the ship, Wards offers something else to Louise and promises to marry her after the mission. He asks about the details of the mission, but Louise refuses to tell him, since Princess Henrietta told her not to reveal anything. The next morning, they finally arrive at their destination and enter a church where they're immediately surrounded by a group of guards hidden in the shadows. Louise hides behind Wards as he says they came to meet the prince, but the guard commander says no one knows that place. Louise mentions that Princess Henrietta told her about the place, then shows the ring on her hand, and immediately the guard commander sheathes his sword and removes his glove, revealing a ring just like hers, and he says she must punch him. And when that happens, a glow emerges from the rings, and then the commander apologizes for the misunderstanding and removes his helmet, revealing he is actually Prince Wallace. Later that night, Louise gives him a letter sent by Henrietta, and Wallace checks the content, and after reading it, he gets up and grabs another letter from a drawer and hands it to Louise. She stares at him and asks if there was any spicy message in the letter, but Wallace says he can't reveal it and explains that his country is in the middle of a civil war between royal families and aristocrats, and they are being manipulated by a third force. He thanks Louise for delivering the letter and asks her to take care. The next morning, Louise wakes up and finds Wards waiting for her outside. He says the mission is complete and proposes they get married right there with Wallace as witness, and Louise gets nervous and steps back saying she can't do that now, and that they should at least return to their country before making any decision. But Wards grabs her from behind and doesn't let go, revealing that he is the third force behind the civil war in the kingdom. Louise is horrified and somehow manages to break free, but ends up colliding with a mysterious man who immediately rips the ring off her hand and uses it to control her. Under the ring's effect, Louise loses consciousness, and that same night preparations are made, and Wards takes her to the altar, where Wallace begins reading the vows. Wards promptly accepts, while Louise, still trying to resist, fights against the mind control. She almost speaks, but suddenly Saito interrupts the wedding screaming, surprising everyone. The shock makes Louise regain consciousness, and she rips her dress again, while Saito explains that his mole kept chasing her runes, leading him there. Furious that wards manipulated Louise, Saito rises and his old rusty sword turns into a new shining blade. Wards even tries to use magic, but to everyone's surprise, Saito's sword absorbs the spell, and Saito leaps into the air to attack him, and Wards casts more magic, but Saito cuts the spell in half and hits him directly. Wards falls to the ground but gets up and claims he already killed Wallace, and now also holds the letter that was given to Louise. He then uses his magic to destroy the whole church, setting everything ablaze and making chunks of debris collapse. Saito stops Louise from chasing after him as a flaming rock falls over them, but Tabitha uses her magic to create a shield and flies them to safety. Later, in the dead of night, the fire fades and Louise, conscious, dreams of herself in a boat. And in the dream, instead of Wards, she sees Saito beside her. And when she wakes up, she realizes that Saito was taking advantage of the situation, but decides to ignore it as they head back home. The next morning, Louise presents herself to Henrietta and hands over the ring, reporting that Wallace was murdered by Wards, and that the letter was also stolen. Taking the blame for everything, Louise begins to cry, but Henrietta interrupts and hugs her, thanking her for everything she did. Later, Louise is summoned by the school headmaster, where Colbert is also present, requesting vacation. After Colbert leaves, Headmaster Osmond comments that Colbert believes he found a place where the remains of the last dragon might be. Headmaster Osmond doubts the dragon's existence, but still authorizes Colbert to go. Then he questions Louise about the mission report, and she explains everything, and he listens patiently, assuring her that none of it was her fault. Later, Louise asks the headmaster why he summoned the human familiar, and Headmaster Osmond reveals that the last time this happened, the legendary human familiar was summoned by the most powerful mage in the world, and this disheartens Louise, as she can't even use basic magic. And after that, she returns to her room and changes clothes. After doing laundry, Saito enters the room and finds even more dirty clothes. He ends up complaining, and Louise gets really irritated and takes on her dominatrix stance, whipping him before kicking him out and throwing a pillow in his face. Saito, furious, hits a pot, but ends up hurting himself. And right after that, he sees Siesta walking by in a different outfit. They sit down, and Siesta tells Saito that vacation has started and she's heading back home. She tells him that her great-grandfather always claimed to have come from a different world, just like Saito, and that back then there were 2 dragons. That catches Saito's attention, and even Jessica hears it, as Siesta says one of the dragons flew toward the sun and died, and the other was ridden by her great-grandfather. But after that, they were never seen again. According to legend, the dragon's remains are still somewhere in her village. That makes Saito remember the conversation he had with a scientist about dragons, and he asks Siesta if she can take him to her village, and she agrees. Meanwhile, Louise goes out looking for Saito, feeling bad for hitting him and kicking him out of the house. She even tries practicing how to apologize, but can't find him anywhere. While walking, Louise spots Saito leaving the school on a horse with Siesta, which shocks her. Immediately, she runs to the cook and asks where Siesta is going. The cook replies that she's returning to her village, and angry that Saito left her alone, Louise returns home furious. On the other hand, we see Saito riding into the woods alongside Siesta, as she asks if it was really right to leave without telling Louise, but Saito, still mad at her, says it's fine. He finally arrives at the village, and Saito asks Siesta to show him where he should start his investigation, and Siesta thanks him for coming along and runs to her house. Meanwhile, Professor Colbert also arrives at the village with the same goal of finding the dragon's remains. After a while, Siesta returns with the map, and she and Saito begin analyzing it, trying to figure out the exact location. Suddenly, the bushes begin to shake, and a creature comes out. It's Kirsch's salamander, accompanied by Jessica. Saito looks up and sees a dragon flying overhead, with Tabitha riding it, and right after, a mole bursts from the ground, with Guichet beside it, ever confident. Saito asks why they're there, and Jessica replies that he too wants to find the legendary treasure said to be with the dragon. Sometime later, they finally find the cave entrance and get super excited. They all go in while Kirsch's salamander lights the way. They walk single file, when suddenly Tabitha warns there's someone else in the cave besides them. Everyone stays alert, and Saito draws his sword, while Siesta hides behind him. Suddenly, a magic blast breaks one of the rocky spikes, and a voice warns that the next shot will be aimed at them. The group gets ready for a confrontation, but Jessica tells them to stop, since she recognizes the voice. When Louise reveals the attacker, they see it's Professor Colbert, and he's surprised to see everyone there with Louise. Professor Colbert immediately analyzes the map with excitement, while Saito and Louise are still annoyed with each other. Louise says she only came as the professor's research assistant before everyone resumes walking, and they finally exit the cave and enter a dense forest. Among the thick trees, they find an abandoned shed, covered in weeds, and the group starts inspecting the structure and the lock, while Tabitha observes something unusual nearby. Saito approaches Tabitha and looks at what she found, and he's shocked to see a message written in Japanese. Louise and Tabitha can't read it, but Saito explains it's written in his homeland's language. Meanwhile, the others manage to open the shed and go inside. There, they find something they can't make sense of, and Saito walks in right after and is surprised at what's inside. He places his hand on the object, and his mark begins to glow, and at that moment, he declares it's an aircraft. He deduces that the people of that world mistook it for some kind of dragon. Saito looks at Siesta and says, now he understands why she seemed different, and he realizes her black hair and eyes come from the Japanese blood running through her veins, passed down from her great-grandfather. Suddenly, Professor Colbert calls Saito and tells him he might be able to return home using the aircraft, which surprises Louise. The professor explains that according to legend, 2 dragons were flying in the sky, and one flew toward the eclipse while the other stayed behind. Siesta then comments that her great-grandfather flew around for some time before landing back on the ground, while Colbert says their timing must have been wrong. According to him, Saito can return to his own world if he flies this strange-looking dragon toward the eclipse, which might be a kind of portal. Later that day, he manages to transport the plane back to the academy, where everyone gathers to marvel at this technology they've never seen before. While looking at the aircraft, Saito remembers that Colbert once showed him a bottle with a liquid he thought was dragon's blood, so he goes in to check. His suspicions were right. The liquid is simply gasoline, and he tells Colbert he can use it to power the aircraft. Colbert promises to produce more so they can use it. Meanwhile, Saito enters and begins checking all the instruments inside the plane to make sure everything is working properly. And to his surprise, everything feels familiar. His sword says the plane must be meant for war, and that Saito has the power to wield any weapon he desires, which is why he instinctively knows how to operate it. He looks at Louise, who's watching him from the other side, before turning away and leaving. While she wonders if Saito is really going to leave, Guichet suddenly arrives on horseback, panicking, and tells Louise there's a big problem. At first, Louise ignores him, but he insists that Wards has taken control of the neighboring country, Albion, and declared war on their kingdom. Meanwhile, Saito, who still doesn't know this, sits inside the aircraft imagining when the next eclipse will happen so he can go home. Back in Albion, Cromwell is sitting on a throne, pleased with how well his plan is going, and thanks the people for stealing the water spirit ring for him. He looks over the map and starts making war plans to conquer the country of Tristane, where Princess Henrietta rules. Ward says everything is ready, and that Tristane can't defend itself now, as the Dragon Knights of Albion are enough to crush all their forces. Cromwell asks when they can attack, and Wards responds that they'll strike on the day of the solar eclipse to take advantage of the darkness. The next morning, Saito goes to Louise and tries to make peace with her, saying he's leaving in 3 days. However, Louise acts arrogantly and says she doesn't care, which deeply hurts Saito. He walks away angrily while Louise watches with sadness. Meanwhile, the war council at the palace is summoned, where the commanders say Albion's army is too large and war against them is unwinnable. They suggest surrendering to save their lives, but Henrietta steps forward as a true leader. She says they will never surrender. It's a matter of honor and pride, and she decides to personally lead the troops. Her mother, the queen, simply agrees. Back at the academy, Saito looks at the moons from the balcony, sadly thinking he'll be leaving in just 3 days. Before heading back inside, he sits down on the ground. Meanwhile, all the academy's mages are summoned to a meeting in the main hall, where the headmaster informs them that the war is about to begin in just a few days, and that Henrietta herself will lead the army. Because of this, the academy will be closed until further notice, which shocks the students. Guichet proudly says he'll join the army, but after being nudged by Jessica, he admits he's being forced because his father is a commander. After hearing that, Louise returns to her room and lights the lamp before approaching Saito, who's asleep. She says her final goodbye, as she plans to fight on the front lines. The next morning, Saito wakes up and finds a note beside his bed. Upon reading it, he discovers that Louise has fired him and said he can go wherever he wants. Saito finds it strange and shows it to Jessica and Tabitha, who examine it. Jessica tells him about the upcoming war. something he had no idea about. And she says Louise went to Princess Henrietta to fight alongside her. And it turns out to be true, as Louise pledges to fight at Henrietta's side. Meanwhile, in Siesta's village, she works on the farm, remembering that Saito will be leaving in a few days. Suddenly, she sees a flying ship in the sky filled with Albion warriors being controlled by Cromwell through his ring. He announces that Tristane refused to surrender, and so they will go to war. At dawn, Saito checks the plane once again, and Jessica tells him to meet with Louise before leaving, since he might never get the chance again. Saito, however, refuses, and Colbert arrives with barrels of gasoline he managed to produce. He says he would have made more, but the war has begun, and Siesta's village will be the first battlefield. Meanwhile, Henrietta and her forces march toward the village when they spot a warship in the sky surrounded by dragons. Back at the academy, Saito decides to stop Albion with the plane, even knowing it might prevent him from returning home. Colbert starts the engine using magic, and at the last moment, Tabitha uses wind magic to give it a boost, and Saito takes off for battle. Tabitha and Jessica also decide to join the war. Meanwhile, Saito flies toward the village at full speed and realizes the plane still has plenty of ammo from before, so he might actually make a difference. Tabitha and Jessica follow close behind, and back on the ground, Princess Henrietta finally puts together a battle plan. She orders the Griffin Knights to attack the Dragon Knights, while the rest of the forces try to move toward the warship to infiltrate it. The Griffin squad advances and tries using wind magic against the Dragon Knights, but the dragons are much faster and dodge easily. They then launch a powerful burst of fire, taking down the Griffins. Meanwhile, the cavalry charges toward the warship, and only Guichet has enough common sense to ask how they're going to board the ship when it's in the air, but the commander keeps marching, ignoring that. The warship fires its cannons, unleashing hellfire on the cavalry over and over, and Guichet breaks formation, but the commander insists on pushing forward. Guichet tries to make sense of this absurd strategy. Elsewhere, Siesta gathers the remaining villagers and tries to lead them into the forest to hide. Meanwhile, Princess Henrietta watches the battle and realizes her place is on the front lines. Suddenly, everyone looks up and sees the eclipse happening. At that moment, a loud sound echoes from the sky, and they see Saito flying with his plane. Everyone on the ground is shocked, thinking it was just a myth. Saito looks over the battlefield and decides to abandon his plans to return home. He turns around and heads into battle, showing everyone the true power of the plane. He guns down every enemy in his path, eliminating them one by one, and the Dragon Knights are completely confused by the machine chasing them. The massacre continues and catches the attention of Sheffield and Wards, who decide to enter the battlefield. Meanwhile, Saito takes out most of the Dragon Knights, and as the Tristane army watches in awe from below, he finally shoots down the last dragon. But suddenly, another dragon, incredibly fast, dodges his bullets and appears behind him, carrying Wards. He draws his sword and absorbs magic, and as he turns the plane around, he prepares to strike Wards, but at the last second, he runs out of ammo. Back on the ground, Sheffield summons a massive golem and begins attacking the army. Wards keeps attacking Saito relentlessly, and all Saito can do is absorb the magic without being able to fight back. Guichet ends up running into Tabitha and Jessica, who are watching the battlefield. They realize the golem is destroying everything and decide to face Sheffield and her golem head-on. Guichet even tries to run away, but Tabitha stops him, and Jessica taunts Sheffield. Sheffield gets ready to attack, but Guichet uses his magic to coat the golem in a pearl-like material, then immediately transforms it into oil using alchemy. Jessica lights it, creating a massive fire around the golem. It quickly disintegrates into ash, and Sheffield realizes she lost control and flees. She ends up being chased by Guiche. Meanwhile, Saito is out of options and starts getting hit by Wards' attacks until one of the wings of his plane catches fire. But before Wards can land the final blow, he's caught off guard by an attack from Tabitha and Jessica, which throws him off balance and knocks him to the ground. At that moment, Louise, acting on impulse, jumps off Tabitha's dragon towards Saito. Tabitha uses magic to soften the fall, letting Louise land safely. Saito grabs her hand and pulls her into the cockpit and starts yelling at her, furious for doing something so reckless. But Louise starts crying and apologizes for her behavior. During that moment, Wards recovers and charges again at Saito, who draws his sword, ready to protect Louise with his life. At that instant, something awakens inside her, and her mark begins to glow intensely. Wards slashes and cuts Saito's cheek, but suddenly, Louise loses control of her body. Not knowing what's happening, she stands up on her own and points her wand at Wards, while Saito yells at her to get back inside the plane. Saito's sword tells him that Louise's latent powers are awakening, and the best thing to do is buy her some time. But Wards keeps attacking, damaging the engine even more. Smoke starts pouring out as the plane begins to fall. Saito realizes the aircraft is too damaged, and that he barely has any control left. Wards gets ready to strike the final blow, but Louise suddenly unleashes her magic. A massive white Louise spreads across the sky, engulfing Wards and burning the warship into pieces. Everyone on the ground watches the scene in shock. When the light fades, Louise falls unconscious into Saito's arms as he tries to regain control of the plane, but he can't. He does his best to land safely on the grass, and luckily they touch down without any major problems. The eclipse ends as well. Meanwhile, Tabby and Kershaw walk toward the destroyed warship, still in disbelief over everything that just happened. Suddenly, Croyle stumbles out and immediately uses his ring to force the two girls to the ground. They're unable to fight back, but Geisha simply slaps the villain, knocking him down, and says that Fouquet has escaped. Louise finally wakes up and starts scolding Saito for missing the eclipse and destroying the plane, but he replies that he chose to stay by her side, which makes her tear up. The two make peace, and when the war finally comes to an end, the heroes receive medals of honor. Later, Louise comes back to show Saito her medal, but when she can't find him, she goes out looking and spots him talking with Siesta again. Saito notices Louise's presence and panics as she pulls out her whip, ready to discipline him once again. Some time passes, and Saito finds himself once again inside the aircraft, flying toward the eclipse. The mark on his hand glows brightly. He passes through the phenomenon, which acts like a black hole, and when he opens his eyes, he's back in Japan. He flies over the streets, happy to be home. He looks to his side, expecting to see Louise, but she's not there. He starts searching frantically until he realizes he came back alone. Suddenly, all his memories come flooding back. How he was summoned to that magical world, how he got beat up by Louise, how he fought in a real war, all of it just to return home. But now, realizing Louise isn't with him, he starts crying and yells her name, begging to be sent back. At that moment, the plane's lever snaps, and he begins plummeting toward the ground. When he hits, Saito wakes up from his dream. He had fallen out of bed. Louise wakes up and asks what's going on, but Saito is so happy to see her that he hugs her tightly, saying he never wants to leave her again. Louise is moved, but being herself, she pushes him to the floor again and tells him to go back to sleep. Saito quietly gets up and lies back down, falling asleep once more. The next day, back at the castle, the coronation ceremony is being held. Henrietta is about to be crowned Queen of Tristane for her key role in the war. Even though she doesn't seem too excited about the title, the minister reminds her that Tristane is still in danger, and the country needs her leadership more than ever. The entire city is celebrating the coronation. Meanwhile, Cromwell is locked away in the dungeons, where he receives a visit from a mysterious woman. She approaches and says she's disappointed with his failure. Cromwell begs for another chance, claiming it was an unknown magic from Louise that caused the explosion and destroyed his army. The woman stares coldly at him and uses a purple ring to kill him. Back at the academy, Louise and Saito are getting ready to head out and watch the parade. Before leaving, Louise gives Saito a weird pair of glasses, saying they're a family heirloom and that he should wear them. They'd look good on him. Saito puts them on, but then realizes he can't take them off, which of course was Louise's plan all along. As they walk out, Saito sees Siesta and goes over to her, inviting her to join them for the parade, but she declines. Suddenly, his glasses start glowing. Louise shows up from behind and explains that the glasses are special. They glow whenever the wearer looks at someone other than their master with ulterior motives. Without hesitation, she zaps Saito with lightning magic. Then she drags him across the grass, where they run into Malicorne and Montmorency, also on their way to the parade. Saito ends up looking at Montmorency, which makes the glasses glow again, causing Louise to zap him once more. Even the headmaster gets so startled that he starts seriously considering expelling them. She drags him off again, and when Saito sees Jessica, the glasses light up again. He gets punished. Then they pass by Tabitha, and he gets zapped once more. His glasses keep lighting up every time he looks at some girl out of habit, while Louise makes sure he gets properly punished. They finally head out, and Saito decides to cover his eyes so he won't see anything, while Louise stands ready with her whip in case anything happens. Suddenly they hear a noise and approach. They see Princess Henrietta coming down the street with her entire entourage. Louise tells Saito to look at the princess, which he does, and of course, she's as beautiful as ever. Unsurprisingly, Saito's glasses light up again, and Louise is furious. She lets the Count run and zaps him with lightning, scaring everyone. The guards go on high alert and surround them. Saito ends up unconscious, and they're both captured and taken to the palace. Louise is stopped at the entrance and not allowed to see Princess Henrietta. She grabs her wand in anger, but one of the guards, a short-haired woman named Agnes, points her weapon at Louise's face. She tells her to drop the wand, but Louise insists they release Saito, saying he didn't do anything and that she caused the explosion. Agnes refuses. Meanwhile, Saito is locked up in the dungeon. He tries to throw the glasses away out of sheer frustration, but stops, thinking that if things keep going this way, Louise will just end up marrying some rich noble, while he watches from afar like a stray dog, famous only for being the loser who died. He lies on the floor and dreams about the princess, when suddenly Princess Henrietta herself shows up to visit him. He tells her he was definitely not dreaming about her, but she grabs his hands and says she has a favor to ask. Being the perv that he is, Saito starts getting the wrong idea, and immediately gets punched in the face by Agnes. He hits the floor, and right before Agnes can draw her weapon again, Henrietta tells her to back off. She wants to speak to Saito alone. Saito, of course, uses the moment to tease Louise, who's also there, earning a kick to the head before the princess steps in to stop her. Henrietta explains that she saw Saito and Louise use a kind of magic never seen before, something that ended the battle, and now she needs their help again. She says her generals and advisors are pressuring her to march on Albion right away, to take advantage of the victory and end the war for good, but she doesn't want more bloodshed. She wants to end the conflict quickly and needs their help. Saito sees that she's being sincere and agrees to help. The princess thanks him and asks him to stay at the academy with Louise, at least for now, but warns him to be extremely careful, because there are spies nearby. She also reveals that Cromwell was assassinated inside the prison, and according to her, there's no way one person could have done it alone. The locks had multiple layers of protection. Only an insider could have broken them. The killer used a spell to suffocate Cromwell, leaving just the outer shell of his body behind. Henrietta turns to Saito and says he can ask for anything as a reward. But before he can answer, she instructs Agnes to let Louise in. Louise walks in with her head down, which immediately terrifies Saito, who runs to the corner yelling he wasn't looking at the princess. But then, Louise starts crying and jumps on him, apologizing for attacking him earlier. She says she was just really worried. Saito looks at her with tenderness and comforts her. As night falls, they're back in the carriage heading to the academy. On the way, Louise shows Saito a special book that the princess gave her, a book that supposedly contains void element spells. But when Louise opens it, surprise, the book is completely blank. The two stare at it, confused, and Saito ends up saying it must be some kind of modern art, a way of saying you should always fight with an empty mind. Louise asks if Saito still wants to go home, and he answers honestly, yes. But he says he won't leave her alone in such a dangerous world. He promises to stay by her side and fight the coming battles, so they can bring peace to the world together. And that's where our video ends.